You call that ink? I've seen better art on bathroom walls, Grandpa. The voice was sharp, cutting through the placid afternoon air with the casual cruelty of youth. It belonged to a young man built like a monument to physical perfection. His fresh buzz cut and cocky smirk, identifying him as one of the SEAL candidates who strode across the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as if they owned it. Frank Nelson, 84 years old and on his knees tending a bed of marigolds near the main barracks, didn't even look up. His hands gnarled with age, but still steady, continued to gently pat the soil around a new bloom. He wore a faded work shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing weathered forearms. On his left arm was the object of the recruit's scorn, a tattoo, its lines blurred by time into a faint grayish-blue emblem. It looked like a crude drawing of a frog holding a trident. Another recruit, equally formidable, laughed. "Is that a tadpole with a fork, Pops? What's that supposed to mean?" "You were a cook in the tadpole division." The small group of candidates circled him, their shadows falling over the flower bed. They were young, brimming with the invincible arrogance that came with being chosen for the world's most demanding military training. To them, this old man was just part of the scenery, a relic to be idly poked for amusement between brutal training evolutions. Frank set down his hand trowel with methodical precision, his movements economical and deliberate in the way only old soldiers move. Each motion seemed calculated, wasteful of neither energy nor attention. He brushed the dark soil from his palms, watching the granules fall back to earth like sand through an hourglass, measuring decades instead of minutes. The recruit's laughter grew louder, sharper, feeding on itself like wildfire consuming dry brush. His silence wasn't submission. It was something else entirely. Something they were too young and too foolish to recognize. It was the stillness of deep water, the quiet before thunder, the held breath before the plunge. Peterson, the ringleader whose name tag glinted in the afternoon sun, crouched down until his face was level with Frank's. The proximity was meant to intimidate, to dominate the space between them. "You heard me, old-timer," he said, his voice dripping with theatrical contempt designed to play to the growing audience. "We're just curious about your little doodle there. What's the story? Did you lose a bet in some dive bar back when Eisenhower was president?" His buddies howled with laughter, slapping each other's massive shoulders. The crowd was expanding now, drawn by the spectacle like sharks to blood in the water. Sailors paused mid-stride, civilian contractors stopped their work. Even a few junior officers lingered at the periphery, their expressions uncertain, caught between disapproval and the paralysis of not wanting to confront SEAL candidates who wore their future elite status like armor. One of the other recruits, a thick-necked mountain of muscle named Davies, pointed at Frank's tattoo and then flexed his own bicep, showing off a crisp, professional rendering of an eagle clutching an anchor, the lines sharp and bold, the colors vivid. "Now that's what real ink looks like, Pop," Davies announced proudly. "Cost me $600 at the best artist in Virginia Beach. Yours looks like you let a kid with Parkinson's draw on you with a ballpoint pen." The comparison hung in the air, cruel and cutting. Peterson reached out and tapped Frank's tattooed forearm with 2 fingers, the gesture dismissive, proprietary, as if the old man were an object rather than a person. "This kindergarten artwork is an embarrassment," he declared loudly, playing to the crowd like an actor who'd found his spotlight. "This is a base for warriors, for people who've earned the right to wear those trident. Not for," he paused dramatically, "whatever it is you are." Frank finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were pale blue, washed out like denim left too long in the sun, but they held a depth that made Peterson's confidence flicker for just a heartbeat. Something ancient lived in those eyes, something that had seen things these boys couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. "It's just a memory, son," Frank said quietly, his voice a low rasp like wind through winter branches. The words were simple, unadorned, offered without heat or rancor. But somehow the very lack of reaction seemed to enrage Peterson further. How dare this fossil refuse to be intimidated? How dare he remain so utterly, infuriatingly calm? "A memory," Peterson scoffed, his voice rising to ensure everyone could hear his performance. "A memory of what, exactly? Forgetting to order more paper clips? Stapling the wrong forms?" He grabbed Frank's wrist, his thick fingers encircling the old man's arm, squeezing the tattooed flesh. His thumb pressed down hard on the faded ink, rubbing it as if trying to smudge away dirt. The pressure increased, the friction warming the weathered skin beneath. The moment Peterson's thumb dug into the faded tattoo, something shifted in the space behind Frank's eyes. The bright California sunshine didn't fade so much as transform, overlaying itself with another sun in another time, filtered through a canopy so thick it turned daylight into a green twilight world. The smell hit first, always the smell, that distinctive reek of mangrove mud, sulfurous and ancient, mixed with the sweet rot of jungle vegetation and the metallic tang of river water. He could feel it again, that oppressive humidity that made every breath feel like drowning in warm bathwater, the kind of wet heat that turned clothing into a second skin and made metal burn to the touch. In his mind's eye, not as memory, but as lived sensation, he was back on the narrow deck of the patrol boat, the PBR's engine thrumming beneath his boots like the heartbeat of some massive predator. The moon was just a silver sliver above the black ribbon of river that snaked through terrain that had no name on any map the politicians in Washington would ever see. Mac had the needle in his hand, the same steady hand that could feel strip an M16 blindfolded, now holding a sewing needle that had been sterilized in whatever whiskey they had left. The ink was improvised, scraped soot from rifle cleaning patches mixed with alcohol, the recipe passed down from frogmen who'd gone before them into places that officially didn't exist. There was no tattoo parlor, no comfortable reclining chair, no smooth kashfas playing overhead. Just three young men, ghosts operating in a ghost war, huddled beneath a rubberized poncho while monsoon rain hammered the fabric like artillery fire. Mac's voice came back to him across the decades. "Hold still, Frankie. This is forever." And young Frank, barely 23 years old, and already carrying secrets that would stay classified for another 40 years, had held still while his brother in arms etched their mark into his skin. The design was crude by necessity, drawn by themselves for themselves. A frog clutching a trident because they were frogmen operating in the Mekong Delta. And every man who wore it would know exactly what it meant without a single word being spoken. It was a covenant written in pain and sealed in brotherhood, a promise that they would go where others couldn't, wouldn't, or shouldn't, and they would bring each other home. Every single time. The sensation snapped back to the present as quickly as it had come. But the memory had done its work, reminding Frank Nelson exactly what that faded gray-blue mark on his arm truly represented. Across the quad, partially concealed behind the thick trunk of a California fan palm, Master Chief Petty Officer James Riggs had been watching the entire scene unfold with growing alarm. Riggs was a command master chief, a man who had spent 3 decades in the Navy, who had seen every possible variety of recruit arrogance and every imaginable flavor of stupid. But this wasn't just another case of cocky candidates getting too big for their britches. This felt different. This felt wrong on a level that made his skin crawl. His first instinct was to march over there and verbally flay those 3 candidates so thoroughly they'd be lucky to be reassigned to scraping barnacles off buoys or in the Aleutian Islands for the rest of their enlistment. But something stopped him, made him pause and look closer. It was the old man's bearing, that preternatural calm, and something else, something about that crude, faded tattoo that nagged at the edges of his memory like a word on the tip of his tongue. Riggs squinted, focusing on the design. He'd seen something like it before, years ago, in an unofficial history of the earliest naval special warfare operators. One of those documents that existed in dusty filing cabinets and was passed around among senior chiefs like Samizdat. The book had contained hand-drawn sketches of insignia that predated the official seal trident, marks that the very first frogmen had given themselves before the teams were even officially formed. His eyes moved from the tattoo to the old man's face, really seeing it for the first time. The set of the jaw, the way he held himself despite being on his knees, the absolute lack of fear in his eyes. A name surfaced from the depths of Riggs' memory, a name that was whispered in the hallowed halls of the Special Warfare Center, spoken of in the same tones reserved for legends and ghosts. It couldn't be. That man would be ancient now if he were even still alive. The story said he disappeared into the mountains of Montana or the deserts of Arizona, that he'd wanted nothing to do with the modern Navy or its recognition. But if it was him, Riggs's blood ran cold at the thought. Those three candidates had no idea they were mocking a living god, poking a sleeping dragon whose fire had forged the very foundation they stood on. Riggs didn't hesitate another second. He turned on his heel and moved with swift purpose away from the confrontation, pulling his phone from his pocket. His fingers were steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system as he scrolled to find the number for the base commander's personal aide. He pressed call and lifted the phone to his ear, his jaw set. "This is Master Chief Riggs," he said the moment the line connected, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable tone of a man who would not be delayed or denied. "Get me Captain Thorne. I don't care what meeting he's in. I don't care if he's on a call with the Chief of Naval Operations. Get him now." There was sputtering on the other end, some young lieutenant trying to explain protocol, trying to tell him that the captain was in his quarterly command brief. "Master Chief, the briefing just started. They can't be interrupted unless it's a genuine emergency." "It is an emergency," Riggs cut in, his voice dropping to a tone that could etch steel. "Tell Captain Thorne that he needs to get down to the grinder outside the main barracks immediately. And tell him," he paused, choosing his next words with absolute precision, "tell him it's about Frank Nelson." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 3 full seconds. Then he heard a sharp intake of breath. "Frank Nelson," the aide repeated, his voice suddenly tight. "Are you certain, Master Chief?" "I'm looking right at him," Riggs said, glancing back over his shoulder. Even from this distance, he could see Peterson now gripping the old man's arm, starting to pull him to his feet. And he's about to be physically assaulted by 3 SEAL candidates who have absolutely no idea they're manhandling a man who has more combat experience in his left thumb than they'll earn in their entire careers. "Get the captain down here now." While Riggs was making his call, the confrontation had reached its breaking point. Peterson, frustrated by Frank's complete lack of reaction, by his maddeningly calm demeanor, decided that words weren't enough anymore. He needed to assert physical dominance, needed to prove that he was in control. His hand clamped around Frank's thin bicep, fingers digging into the wiry muscle that was still there beneath the weathered skin. "All right, Grandpa," Peterson announced loudly, beginning to haul the old man to his feet. "Show's over. Let's get you to base security. They can figure out which old folks' home you wandered away from." The act of putting hands on him, of treating Frank Nelson like a confused invalid or a trespasser, was the final violation. Frank didn't resist the pulling. He let himself be brought upward, his joints creaking and popping in the way old bodies do, but as he rose, something shifted in his eyes. For the first time since this entire ugly scene had begun, a flicker of something other than patient acceptance appeared in their pale depths. It was cold and ancient and utterly terrifying, a look that calculated with absolute precision the exact amount of force needed to snap Peterson's elbow backwards and was actively, consciously choosing not to employ it. Frank let out a soft sigh, not of fear but of profound disappointment. In Captain Thorne's conference room, the moment his aide burst through the door without knocking, everything changed. The young lieutenant's face was pale, his eyes wide with something approaching panic. "Sir," he stammered, addressing the captain directly and ignoring the half-dozen other senior officers seated around the polished table. "Master Chief Riggs is on the line. He says it's a Condition 1 emergency." Captain Marcus Thorne, a man whose composure was legendary throughout the Pacific Fleet, fixed his aide with a look that could freeze seawater. "This better be genuine, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "What's the nature of the emergency?" The aide swallowed hard. He said, "To tell you, sir, it's Frank Nelson." The name landed in that sterile, air-conditioned room like a flashbang grenade. Every senior officer at the table froze, mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-movement. PowerPoint slides about budget allocations and training schedules became utterly meaningless. One of the command master chiefs at the far end actually gasped audibly. Thorne snatched the phone from his aide's hand. "Riggs, talk to me," he commanded. He listened for no more than 10 seconds before his expression transformed from disbelief to shock, and finally settled into a mask of cold, barely controlled fury that was infinitely more frightening than any shouting could ever be. "He's where?" Thorne said quietly, dangerously. "With who doing what?" He stood up so abruptly his chair shot backwards and nearly toppled. "Get my vehicle. Alert every department head and every command master chief on this base. Everyone at the grinder in 5 minutes. Full dress whites if they can manage it. Move now." The conference room emptied faster than it would have for a fire alarm. Senior officers scrambling with an urgency that would have been comical in any other circumstance. Outside, the sound came first. The distinctive wail of command vehicles. Not the familiar whoop of security, but the piercing, authoritative shriek of military authority responding to a crisis. Heads turned throughout the quad as a convoy of black SUVs appeared, lights flashing, tires squealing as they formed a perfect semicircle around the area. The doors opened in synchronized precision, and out stepped not military police, but a wave of brass and authority that seemed to physically push the air aside. Captain Thorne emerged first, his service dress, white seeming to glow in the California sun, the gold eagle on his collar catching the light like fire. Behind him came a phalanx of senior staff, their combined rank and presence creating a pressure that was almost tangible. The laughter died instantly, choked off as if someone had flipped a switch. The SEAL candidates froze, their arrogance evaporating like alcohol on hot pavement. Peterson's hand, still gripping Frank's arm, suddenly felt like it was holding a live grenade. He released his grip as if burned and snapped to attention, his body rigid with terror. Thorne crossed the distance in long, purposeful strides, his eyes locked on Frank Nelson with an intensity that made everyone else invisible. He stopped exactly 3 feet away and then executed the sharpest, most perfect salute of his entire career. "Mr. Nelson," Thorne's voice rang out across the suddenly silent base. "It is an honor, sir, to have you on my command. I apologize profoundly for the reception you have received from my men." He held the salute, unwavering. "You three," Thorne said, his voice dropping to lethal quiet as he finally acknowledged the recruits. "This man is Frank Nelson. Before SEALs existed, he was a frogman in the underwater demolition teams. He hit the beaches at Incheon. He was a founding member of SEAL Team 1. He volunteered for MACV-SOG, running cross-border operations that officially never happened. This tattoo you found so amusing is the original hand-drawn insignia of his 3-man reconnaissance unit, the Delta Frogmen. They were so effective, the enemy called them ghosts. And unlike almost every other unit of its kind, he brought every single one of his men home. Everyone. This man wrote the book we live by. He is not a relic. He is the foundation. Frank raised a weathered hand gently. "It was a long time ago, Captain. A different world." Thorne turned back to the candidates. "As of this moment, your candidacies are suspended. Report to my office at 0600 tomorrow." "Get out of my sight." They fled. Frank stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Thorne's arm. "They're just kids, Captain, full of fire and vinegar. We were the same once." He turned to address the gathered crowd. "Pride is a heavy anchor. It can hold you steady in a storm, or it can drag you straight to the bottom. The trick is knowing which it's doing." As he spoke, memory flickered. Again, a younger Frank in the jungle, sitting on an ammo crate, sketching a design while his teammates watched. "We're ghosts in the Delta," young Frank said, grinning. "Delta Frogmen, this is our mark." The fallout was immediate. Captain Thorne added a mandatory module on heritage to all training. The story became legend, told to every new recruit as a reminder that quiet dignity might mask extraordinary valor. Peterson and his friends were rolled back, forced to restart buds from day one, carrying the weight of their shame. Weeks later, a humbled Peterson approached Frank while he tended the same marigolds. "Mr. Nelson," he said quietly, his voice raw, "I'm sorry for everything." Frank looked up, saw the cocky smirk replaced with genuine humility. He reached into his cooler and handed Peterson a cold bottle of water. "I know, son. Lesson learned is more important than the mistake made." He gestured toward the distant sounds of training. "Keep your head down and your heart right. The water doesn't care how proud you are. It only cares if you can swim." Peterson took the water, his throat too tight to speak. He nodded, a silent promise passing between the old warrior and the young man just beginning to understand what it truly meant to be worthy. Frank Nelson's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day. If you were moved by his quiet valor, hit that like button, Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of unassuming heroes.